It starts with a glance. Not even a full one, just a fraction, a flicker. A breathless recognition masquerading as coincidence. And then it settles, quietly. Like a slow burn in the chest. That unspoken energy. Not loud, not forceful. Just present enough to pull her in. You know that kind. The kind of look that doesn't beg for attention but somehow captures all of it. He knows exactly how much presence to give and how much to withhold. That delicate push and pull. That's where it begins. It's not about what he says. Not really. It's the spaces between his words. The pauses that invite her curiosity. The air he leaves untouched so she can fill it with her own stories, her own projections. That's the thing about men like him. They're mirrors. But not the kind that reflect. The kind that shimmer just enough to make her wonder what parts of herself are still unseen. She laughs and he watches. Not like he's impressed. Not like he needs it. But like he's cataloging it. Softly. Silently. As if her joy is a code he already understands but still wants to decode again. That's what hooks her. Not the performance. The perception. The way he makes her feel like she's being studied without being judged. Like her chaos isn't chaos, just data. And he's fluent in it. But it's deeper than charm. More precise than seduction. He doesn't rush. And when he finally touches her, barely, a hand on her lower back, a knuckle brushing her arm, it's so restrained, so deliberate, that it disarms her more than a kiss ever could. It's not just a touch. It's a whisper. A whisper that says, I know where you're guarded, and I won't push. Not yet. And that, right there, is where it begins to fracture her. Because he's not offering love. He's offering relief. Relief from the heaviness she's been carrying. From the ache of never being seen without being needed. She's used to proving, to performing, to holding it all together. But around him she forgets. She softens. And not because he asks her to. But because he doesn't. He doesn't demand vulnerability. He just makes it feel like exhaling. But here's the part no one tells her. He didn't become this way by accident. He learned to read hearts the same way a pickpocket learns to read hands. Not to care, but to take. It wasn't cruelty that shaped him. It was hunger. Long ago, when his own needs went unmet, when love felt like a transaction, earned, not given, he made a choice. If no one would feed him emotionally, he'd feed himself. Of attention. Of affection. Off the momentary high of being wanted. And so he became exactly what he needed to be. For just long enough. And she didn't see it coming. 'Cause it wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. It was kind. It was intuitive. Felt safe, almost sacred. Like the love she always believed might exist. But couldn't quite find. Until he stood there, arms wide, soul closed, offering her the shape of love, without the weight of it. So she falls. Not fast but deep. In the way women fall when they finally think they've been found. In the way the wounded heart opens when it thinks the war is over. And she lets him in, carefully at first. Story here. Fear there. An old wound dressed up as a joke. Testing the waters, watching for the recoil. But it never comes. He takes it all. Patient. Gentle. Tuned. What she doesn't know is that he's not taking it in. He's collecting. Like trophies. Not out of malice. But to measure his own worth by how deeply he can be trusted by someone who doesn't trust easily. This is not love. This is the architecture of emotional survival disguised as intimacy. And yet, it feels so much like home. Because somewhere inside her, that familiar ache, the longing to be chosen, to be understood without having to explain, sings when he's near. Because she, too, has lived a life of quiet desperation. She, too, has masked her needs behind competence, buried her softness beneath sharpness. And now someone sees it. Or seems to. So when he hugs her, really hugs her, it's not just arms around a body. It's memory. Muscle memory. Of what it felt like to be a child reaching for comfort that never quite landed. That moment when he pulls her close, lets her melt, lets her disappear into the hollow of his chest, into the illusion of safety. It heals something. Or at least it feels like it does. But what heals also binds. Not to the man but to the feeling. And that's where the craving begins. Not for him, but for the version of herself she becomes when he's near. The softness, the openness, the child that's finally allowed to stop performing. That's what she returns for. Again and again. And he knows it. Because he's not addicted to women. He's addicted to their surrender. The moment they stop resisting. The moment they give him what he never gave himself. Permission to be needed. That's the high. That's the hit. And when he feels it, when he feels her letting go, melting into his energy, he stays just long enough to anchor it. To make her believe this is the beginning. Then slowly, he retracts. Not cruelly. Elegantly. A day without a text. Subtle shift in tone. The warmth dips a degree or two. Enough for her to feel it, but not enough to call it out. That's the trick. The plausible deniability. He makes it feel like maybe she imagined it. Like maybe she's asking for too much. Being too sensitive. Too soon. And she begins to question herself. Not because she doesn't trust him, but because she doesn't fully trust her own worth yet. Because part of her still believes love must be earned. That she must not need too much. That if she's just a little more patient, a little more low maintenance, a little more cool, he'll come back. He'll hug her like that again. And mean it. But the hug was never about meaning. It was about magnetism. About charge. And about the part of her that aches to feel again. That part he sees. That part he holds. Briefly. Enough to make her need the feeling. Not the man. He becomes a ghost she chases in the body of every man who comes after. She doesn't understand it at first. How every new connection feels shallow, flavorless. How the next man can say all the right things but still feel empty. It's not the words she's missing. It's the presence. The depth. The moment she first felt seen in silence. That sacred stillness he offered before he vanished. And this is how it lingers. This is how emotional addiction is born. Not from pleasure, but from intermittent relief. Like a thirst that never fully quenches. Like a prayer whispered into a void that once answered, and then fell silent. She begins to internalize the silence. Makes it about her. Her body. Her energy. Her worth. Not realizing. This was never about her. This was about the hunger in him. And the ache in her. How they found each other not to heal, but to reenact. Because she didn't need a lover. She needed a witness. And he needed a mirror. Two souls reenacting the shape of affection without ever letting it settle into the bones. That's what most people call chemistry. But chemistry isn't always truth. Sometimes it's trauma that found someone who speaks its dialect. The hug felt like healing because it mirrored the tenderness she was taught not to expect. The safety she was too strong to admit she still wanted. He gave her permission to be soft. But he never planned to stay long enough for her to feel safe in it. And that's the cruelty. Not in the leaving but in the unlocking. He left her open. And when you leave someone open they don't just bleed. They search. Not for another person. But for the version of themselves they found, fleetingly, in the arms of someone who didn't stay. She starts wondering if maybe she imagined it. Maybe he wasn't that attuned. Maybe it was all projection. But the body doesn't lie. The body remembers the way it felt to be held without conditions. Even if it was temporary. Even if it wasn't real. And this is the hardest part. Forgiving herself. Not for falling but for needing. For wanting something so deeply that she ignored the warning signs. For mistaking chemistry for compatibility. For hearing her own voice in his silence. Because no one tells her that wanting love doesn't make her weak. That softness is not a flaw. That the ability to melt is a strength. That being open, even to someone who couldn't hold her, is not shameful. It's sacred. She begins to see that he wasn't her answer. He was her mirror. The one that showed her how deeply she longed to be held. Not just by someone else but by herself. Without fear. Without performance. And that's when she starts to wake up. Not in bitterness. Not in anger. But in clarity. That it wasn't the hug she needed. It was the remembrance it stirred. That beneath the armor, beneath the independence and the competence and the coolness, was a heart still willing to trust. A heart still longing to exhale. And maybe that's not weakness at all. Maybe that's where the healing begins. But healing isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with thunder or clarity. It arrives in the quietest ways. In the pauses you use to fill with apology. In the texts you no longer send at midnight, trying to tether someone who was never truly holding the rope. In the ache that softens not because it's gone, but because you've stopped trying to make it mean something about you. You start to realize he wasn't the beginning of something. He was the echo of an old wound. A wound that finally grew tired of bleeding in silence. He gave it a name, not consciously, maybe not even willingly, but his absence shaped the contours of your awakening more than his presence ever did. Because the real pain wasn't that he left. It's that he made you feel and then left. He reminded you of how badly you wanted to be felt, not just touched. And when he pulled away, it wasn't just him you mourned. It was the return of that silence. That emptiness. That quiet confirmation that intimacy is still something you have to chase, rather than something you can rest inside. You begin to see the pattern. The roles. The scripts. The unconscious pull toward those who spark recognition, not connection. The way you confuse longing for depth. The way absence feels like proof of value. The way you mistake anxiety for chemistry because it mimics the unpredictability you grew up with. He fit that chaos perfectly. Not because he was malicious, but because his own patterns demanded distance. His own history trained him to feel safe only in the edges of connection, never in the center. He doesn't get close, he creates closeness. Briefly, strategically, enough to taste love without swallowing it. And you've been wired to believe that if you can just be enough, just beautiful enough, chill enough, light enough, low maintenance enough, then maybe someone like him will finally stay. Maybe someone like him will stop running. Maybe, just maybe, you can rewrite the ending of a story that started long before him. But the truth is, it was never yours to fix. He wasn't a puzzle you were meant to solve. He was a reflection. And sometimes reflections distort before they clarify. Sometimes you have to get lost in someone else to realize you've abandoned yourself. Sometimes the lesson isn't in what they gave you, but in what they took, and why you let them. And that doesn't make you naive. Makes you human. Because somewhere deep inside, beyond the logic and the self-awareness, there's still a girl who just wants to be held without being handled. Loved without being analyzed. Seen without having to shine. And for a moment he gave her that. So it's okay if you miss him. Even now. Even knowing what you know. Because you're not missing him. You're missing what you felt in his arms. You're grieving a version of you that finally got to exhale. That finally believed maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to try so hard. But now you're learning how to hold yourself in that same tenderness. Not by becoming harder, but by becoming more honest. The honesty hurts, first. Because it shows you all the places where you betrayed yourself just to be close to someone who never offered permanence. It shows you how many times you silenced your needs so you wouldn't be too much. How many nights you let confusion masquerade as mystery. How many times you shrunk your truth just to keep the story going. But honesty is also a homecoming. It's where you stop begging your wounds to be beautiful and start letting them speak. It's where you stop calling it love when it's actually adrenaline. Where you stop romanticizing restraint. Where you start asking, does this person make me feel more like myself or less? He didn't. Not really. He made you feel alive, but only in the parts of you that were starving. Only in the spaces you had been neglecting. That's the thing about emotional hunger. It'll make breadcrumbs taste like a feast. But you're learning, slowly, gently, that the fullness you're looking for was never in someone else's arms. It's in the moment you realize your sensitivity is not a weakness. That your longing is not desperation. That your desire to be held is not a flaw. It's the part of you still brave enough to believe in connection. He couldn't meet that part. Not because you're too much. But because he's not enough. Not in the way you need. not in the way that stays. And somewhere in that realization something breaks. And then softens. The tension leaves your shoulders. The urge to reach out fades. You stop checking your phone. Not out of pride but out of peace. Because you no longer need the hit. You no longer need the reassurance that you mattered. You know you did. And more importantly, you know you still do. Even without the hug. Even without the ache. Even without the version of you he temporarily awakened. Because now, you're becoming that version without him. On your own. For real. You start surrounding yourself with quieter connections. Ones that don't spike your nervous system. Ones that don't make you guess. Ones that feel like conversations rather than performances. And at first they feel boring. Or maybe just unfamiliar. Because when you've spent years mistaking chaos for care, peace feels like loss. But slowly you rewire. You stop seeking the edge and start looking for the center. You find beauty in the stillness. Strength in the softness. You stop needing someone to chase your tears to believe your sadness matters. You stop waiting for withdrawal to prove your worth. You become the hug, the arms, the presence, the witness, first to yourself, then to others. And when you meet someone new, because you will, you won't need the mystery to feel alive. You won't need to lose yourself to feel seen. You'll recognize that desire doesn't have to be earned through confusion. That love isn't about the spark. It's about the space it creates inside you. And you'll know the difference. You'll feel it in the way your nervous system settles instead of spikes. In the way your laughter comes easier. In the way your needs no longer feel like burdens. In the way your heart no longer performs. In the way you don't need to be held to remember your own worth. Because the real healing is not about finding someone who hugs you right. It's about becoming the person who no longer needs to be hurt just to remember how deeply you feel. And one day, without warning, you'll remember him. The way he looked at you. The way he touched you. The way he left. But it won't sting. Because now, you can hold the memory without becoming it. Now you can see the role he played without wishing him back. Now you can love the girl who reached for him without needing to change her. She wasn't foolish. She was ready. She was hungry. She was brave. And now she is whole. That hug. It awakened her. But it was her pain that taught her how to stay. Not for someone else. But for herself. And this time she won't leave. If this spoke to something unspoken inside you, stay with us. This channel is where those hidden stories find their voice. Where the ache beneath your patterns is understood, not judged. Subscribe if you're drawn to truth over comfort. Depth over distraction. These aren't just voiceovers. They're mirrors. And every week we go deeper.